Hi everyone, I'm Lisa.
And I'm Nick.
And welcome to It Takes Two, the podcast where two people take two movies with the same plot or premise and watch and discuss them.
And in this week's episode, we watched Ammonite and A Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
So we've decided for June to do LGBT movies.
Yes.
Is our main goal. So these are both movies. I don't know how best to describe them. They're both movies about queer women who live in relative isolation with their mothers by the sea, and another queer woman who meets them there and accompanies them on walks, and then they fall in love.
And they're both set in the 1800s.
Incorrect, because
What? Portrait
of a Lady on Fire is set in the 1770s. And Ammonite is set in the 1840s. So they're about 70 years apart. It will have said 18th century. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the 1700s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Portrait of a Lady on Fire is the 1770s in France, and Ammonite is 1840s in a seaside town in the UK. What's it called? Lyme? Regis Lyme or something?
Something like that, yeah. I thought it was Lyme when they said it, but then, I don't know. One of my notes just said she sells seashells by the seashore.
Yes, correct, she does.
Yes, because it's that's a long-standing issue with women not being recognised for scientific discoveries.
Right, I didn't know where you were going with that. So long-standing issues with selling seashells by the seashore.
Your face was just like, oh no, what's he gonna say?
No, I just had no idea where the end of that sentence was going to be. Yes, so they're both films kind of focus on the erasure of female works, essentially, because in Portrait of a Lady on Fire, it focuses on how women are kind of erased from the history of art to some degree, and in Ammonite, it's about how women are erased from the history of science. And to do that, they focused on real women in science, because both, I forgot her name, Mary...
Yes.
What's her last name? I literally blanked on her last name. Mary...
Starts with A.
Yeah. Mary Anning.
Yeah.
I have no idea why I blanked on it. So Mary Anning and Charlotte Murchison were both real geologists, and they did the work that they did in the film. There's no real evidence in reality that they had any kind of romantic relationship. That's just an interpretation that this writer-director has chosen to take. So he doesn't want it to be viewed as a biography necessarily. But the people in it are real. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Sorry. The thing for me is the order we watched them in really determines sometimes the outcome of what movie we tend to focus on. Normally we focus on the movie that's usually worse, just in general, because we can just pull that apart and be just like, the other movie is, there's a tearing, and it's like the good movie is really good and the bad movie is just really bad, that we spend so much time focusing on the bad movie.
No, these are both pretty good.
There are aspects of both of these movies that are absolutely fantastic. And it was interesting because you said to me, when I mentioned it when we were watching it, or just after we'd finished Ammonite, that you'd watched them the opposite way around. So we watched Ammonite first and then A Portrait of a Lady on Fire. And you'd found some of Ammonite boring because you'd watched A Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and the way we watched it, I expressed which I'm going to express now, is very similar to a previous movie we watched, which was our previous set, which we watched was...
Never Really, Sometimes Always?
Yes.
Yeah, I knew that's what I would compare it to.
Yeah. Where you don't need dialogue to express how the characters feel, because in my opinion, that leads to bad acting. And in these two movies, there's a lot of expression, and a lot of the story comes out of just how the actors portray the characters and how the characters respond to the scene. And there are some, I think Mary's Kate Winslet's character Mary, in a lot of the scenes she's in, because she's very I'm going to read out the note that I wrote because it is just so funny. Proper English is just lying politely. Because when they have the scene, so Mary's approached by this guy who wants to make a name for himself.
Yeah.
He turns up and they're there because his wife has melancholia, which is a real 1800s medical disorder that women have.
Yeah, it's heavily implied but never stated that she has lost a child.
Yeah.
Because she dresses as if she's in mourning for the whole beginning of the film, and there's a throwaway line which is she tries to cuddle her husband in bed and he says, "Now's not the time to make another child," or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like just one throwaway line, but you go, okay.
I want to get into Charlotte a little bit
later, or now.
Just in a second.
Yeah.
The reason I bring up that proper English is just lying politely.
Yeah.
Is Mary doesn't have that barrier of the way she communicates with men, where you see a lot of the other female characters in both these movies, the way they speak to men is very different. And I think without Kate Winslet's powerhouse acting, it wouldn't have been as good. But she is just so blunt and to the point that she is just constantly, "I'm sick of your shit."
Yeah,
and it's fantastic.
I think that's how Mary Anning really was in real life. And that's probably why there is some amount of speculation, because she was unmarried. She never had... There's no evidence of her having a relationship with anyone, male or female.
Yeah.
But she was very... I think that's just what she was like, personality-wise. I think that's probably why there are, speculations as to maybe she wasn't, a straight woman.
Yeah. And then you see the counterpoint of that, Charlotte, who's basically a prisoner in her own life.
Yes.
Because there was that scene you just mentioned where they're lying in she's lying in bed in the hotel room and he's getting into his pajamas, and I just thought, man, the clothing back then is just so... There's several points where I took notice of just how annoying the clothing would have been to wear in the 1800s. But yeah, she's just like, as any modern healthy relationship would, one person is undressing, the other person is in bed, and the person who's in bed is just, casually watching the other person get undressed, to the point where she realizes she's doing it and then pretends she wasn't. And then her husband gets in bed and all she does is try and cuddle him, which, from her point of view, from her mental health, would probably be good. And he just takes it as a sexual advance and is like, "Stay away from me," because he, in his mind, I don't know if it was an 1800s men or just his character in general, because, I'm not a man from the 1800s.
Yep. You're not?
No. People can be... And I think that's why she was so... there's other reasons. But I think that why she embraced the relationship with Mary so quickly is because she was getting something that she wasn't getting from her husband, which is intimacy without... it doesn't have to be sexual. It just can be...
Right.
Just sharing a moment and sharing a touch with somebody.
Yeah.
Where you're living in the society where everybody's prim and proper.
Because the most intimate moments in that movie are when Charlotte is sick and Mary just wipes the sweat off her brow.
Yeah.
There's something, and then I can't remember, there's another bit, I know I took a note of it, but there's it's just very, very subtle, totally non-sexual, non-romantic things. She applies a salve to her because she's sick and she's trying to help her. And it's those are the moments that are the most intimate in that whole film. Genuinely, you know what I mean? They are very, it's obviously affection that she's not getting from her husband, because her husband is very much this is our job, is to have children, I guess, or whatever, it's, and he, the way he treats Charlotte is just really not good, in my opinion. But I mean, that's how it was at the time, I guess. that like he speaks for her, like for the whole, anytime she's around him in front of other people, she doesn't speak.
Yeah.
He speaks for her, and then you get that especially in the I mean, at your first introduction to them, she doesn't say a word for the whole scene. He's talking to Mary, and she's just standing there, and he's like, "This is my wife," and then she opens her mouth, and he cuts her off and says something. But it's really highlighted in the scene where they go for lunch together, and he orders himself this big lavish meal, and he wants cream, and he wants this, and he wants all this stuff, and he wants their wine from this year, and and then the waiter kind of looks at Charlotte, and he says, "My wife will have."
The white fish with no sauce.
Yeah, the white fish baked, no sauce.
Yeah.
She doesn't even get to open her mouth. She doesn't get to look at him any. She doesn't get to say anything to him. And he's having this massive meal with, it's very luxurious, and he orders for her, and it's like she gets the most simple thing on the menu.
The interesting part about that scene where they go into the restaurant was when they go into the crowded area and people are talking and there's music playing, and she's like, "Oh, can we stay here?" And it's like, "No, for your health, we have to go somewhere quiet." It's like...
Yeah.
Clearly that's not what she needs. Like, melancholia is not a real thing.
Yeah. And then they contrast that later on because the doctor doesn't want to invite Charlotte to the party.
Yeah.
And Mary is like, no, she enjoys music more than I do, and she needs to go out, and he's like, I recommend against it. And she's like, well, as her friend, I recommend it for
as
her.
the person who actually helped her.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
basically. And I think that, again... because that's before they have any sexual scenes, I believe, and I think that endears her more to Mary as well, that Mary is actually paying attention to her and what she needs and wants, and what's, because the first sign of her getting better is her playing the piano.
Yeah.
So music is obviously quite important to her life, to her mental health, and Mary's the only person who has actually noticed it.
Yeah. I think we are neglecting something quite important.
The other movie?
The other movie, yeah.
We've got lots of time. No, they're both fantastic movies. Like you said before, first time I watched these movies, I think I did watch them back to back. And I watched Portrait of a Lady on Fire first, and it is a fantastic movie.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic movie. It's written and directed by Céline Sciamma, who also did Petite Maman.
Yeah.
So thank you, Madman, because they sent us it on DVD.
Yes, this is a unofficially sponsored episode by Madman New Zealand. Thank you very much for giving us free stuff.
Yeah, so because it was the same competition. We won a DVD of Portrait of a Lady on Fire and a poster. We have a poster of Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which we can stick up now that you've seen it. And take us to Petite Maman, and that's why we ended up doing an episode on that. But it's the first time I watched Portrait of a Lady on Fire first, and it was so fantastic that it overshadowed Ammonite. So I'm glad that when we watched them the other way around, because I actually feel like I appreciated Ammonite more, having not just watched Portrait of a Lady on Fire first. So I'd recommend if anyone's gonna watch these two back to back, start with Ammonite. They're both really good though.
Or just don't watch movies in a row. It's actually bad for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
We do it every week for the podcast. Well, not every week.
Not every week.
Yeah.
And we don't always do them back to back.
No. We have been recently though. I think I think it just, not this time, but I think it helps bring a lot of energy, and everything's really fresh in your mind, and you haven't sort of
fair enough.
Played connect the dots. You sort of go halfway through the podcast and go, I remember, because it was like sorry, I'm now not doing what I said I was going to do.
It's okay.
The figurines, that took me like halfway through the movie to figure out why the mother was so obsessed with cleaning them and dusting them and drying them and then putting them back on the shelf.
They do a similar thing in The Favourite, which, funnily enough, is another queer film. It's about Queen Anne and two women who were courting her unofficially, but she never had a living child. So she had, I think she also had figurines, but it's the same in Ammonite, that it's the mother, the first time we see them is just the mother polishing these figurines, and you don't know what they're for or what they are. And then later on, because obviously Mary has picked up on what's going on with Charlotte, she mentions that her mother had 10 children, and 8 of them have passed away, and that each one of them, when it went, took something of her with them, is what she says, I think. And then later on you see the mother, or you see, I think, Charlotte goes to wash them or something, and the mother's just like, no, my babies.
Yeah.
And it's, you realise that there's 8 of the figurines.
Yeah, because it was only until that point, because they're set up on a shelf, I think, above their kitchen area.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can't really tell how many there are, because they're not quite in focus, but they're in focus, but they're not quite in the frame where you notice, like, you just notice the hand movement, for me anyway, rather than, it wasn't until they were lined up on the table and there was 4 and 4, and my brain is much easier than reading how many there are when they're, 2 lines.
Yeah, and they do it intentionally, I think, that you see them first not knowing the
significance.
Yeah.
But yes, back to A Portrait of a Lady on Fire, because I think, we're...
Well, there's actually similar... I know we're going totally off book at the moment, but similar to that, because that's a very female experience, I think, especially for that time, having, being pregnant and losing the pregnancy, or having a child that doesn't make it to adulthood.
Yeah.
I think especially that time is very much a common female experience. And what they do in Portrait of a Lady on Fire, to show a different but similar shared female experience around that time, is they have the maid has become pregnant, and they help her get an abortion. So they do both films touch on kind of taboo subjects of, female reproductive health and how they weren't talked about. And it's interesting because, you get that, you kind of get that in Ammonite, that the husband doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Obviously, men are not speaking to her about it, but Mary shares her mother's experience, and, she starts to go like, okay, other people have been through this. And then you get that in Portrait of a Lady on Fire, because the maid has become pregnant, and they try to get her to do lots of like strenuous activity to try and lose the baby, and they get her to drink some kind of a stew made with a particular kind of weed and things like that, which doesn't work. So then they later have to bring her to a herbalist and get that done. But Marianne, who is the painter, reveals in that first moment, or in that when they're trying to get her to when they're trying to go through their own ways of doing it, she reveals that she previously has had an abortion.
Yeah.
So again, it's this idea of, the women coming together and talking about their shared experiences with this thing that isn't talked about in society, but was obviously happening, because they go and meet these other women, and the herbalist knows that she's still pregnant. She's like, you need to come in 2 days' time, we'll do this. And it's treated like a totally normal thing.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously going on all the time. But then at the same time, they decide to recreate it in a painting, because they're marking that it was significant for her.
Yeah.
But I just think it's interesting that both films touch on subjects that would be kind of taboo.
It's interesting because one of the things that I took away from both these films, they both did it, but they did it in different ways. There's a lot of focus on Mary's hands, or I was just being hyper aware of what her hands were doing.
Okay.
And it was also interesting because from Portrait of a Lady on Fire, when you're seeing the painting not... it was very like when you see someone who clearly can't play guitar playing guitar, where the camera zooms straight into their hands. But it was interesting watching the way she was painting, because I don't know anything about oil painting.
Well, I can tell you that every time you see a hand painting in that movie, it's not the actress, it's the artist.
Yeah.
They have an actual painter who painted all those paintings, and she's the one whose hand you see.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is there was a lot of focus on the hands, and it was just very different to what I would think a professional oil painter would do, because when I go through memory of seeing other painting, there's in media, obviously not in real life. The only thing I've ever seen is life drawing, and that was all done with pencil or maybe graphite or whatever. There's kind of like a for that artist anyway, there was kind of like a feverishness to it, like like a controlled uncertainty. Does that make any sense to you?
Right, yeah.
Because the brushstrokes seem to be random, and the hand movements seem to be very random. Like she would sort of go repetitively over the same area without touching the canvas, and it was just...
That's I from doing animation in college, that was how we learned to draw circles, was that you should like do it over and over above the thing before because you get your hand into the practice of doing it, and then you lay down the line and it makes it more perfectly
circular,
round. Yeah. Whereas if you just got a piece of paper and got a pencil and just tried to draw a circle,
you're gonna end up with like something weird.
Yeah. So I'd say it's something similar to that she's like practicing, like, is this how it's gonna look before she lays it down on the canvas. Will be my best guess at what she's doing there. She's kind of, measuring and getting it in her head, like, yes, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, there was just the counterflip to that was the moment that stuck out to me in Ammonite was where Mary's character walks. They're both on Mary and Charlotte. Charlotte's, I think it's the first day out with Mary.
Right. Okay.
And she just is like 2 rocks over, and it's like literally the scene opens with her squatting down and urinating.
Oh yeah.
And then her response was just to wipe her hands on her apron just real casually, and then breaks food in half and tries to hand it to her, and it's like, oh, whatever, you're not eating. And then walks off like 10 meters and sits on another rock and eats it. It's just like, did you intentionally pee next to her and then just be like, do you want some food? No, all right, I'm going all the way over there. But yeah, there's just lots of, I guess, it was just a different time, but it was just, it's just like, wow, it's so unhygienic.
I think she just doesn't care as well.
Yeah, but it's just... Yeah.
I think that's kind of to show the contrast between her and Charlotte in a way, that Charlotte has been brought up as this proper lady, and she's, this guy's wife, and she's to do all this, whatever. And Mary, she doesn't follow the conventions. Yeah. She's just out there, she's, in slightly more practical... I mean, she's still wearing dresses, but she's in slightly more practical clothes.
I think
she's
that was
climbing
the
up.
law, though.
Right. But she wears like practical boots, and she gives she gives Charlotte practical boots to wear on the beach, and she's just like climbing up and getting herself muddy, and she doesn't give a shit.
Which is quite interesting when you see Charlotte do it for the first time, and she has to take her wedding ring off. And Mary sort of like stands up and looks at her like, "You're wasting your time, girl." And then she's just like digging into the mud, and then the moment where they break off a random piece of wood and then strap the giant rock to it and then carry it off together. It was like quite, friggin' teamwork moment, but it was just quite seeing that change from someone who was sitting there being prim and proper to being like, oh, no, I'm going to dig in the mud now.
Yeah.
You freed me from my gilded cage. I'm going to dig in the mud.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, we've talked about Mary Anning not getting recognised for scientific discoveries and stuff, but Charlotte Murchison, in her own right, did become a geologist after those trips with Mary Anning. So those interactions happened. There's just no evidence that there was like a romantic relationship between them or a sexual relationship. But she did learn from Mary Anning, and she did then go on to become a geologist and make her own discoveries and things. So that really happened, that she did make that change. So it's just really, I really like how they showed it in the film, the transition. I think Saoirse Ronan was pretty good at, depicting that. Yeah,
it's interesting because both of the relationships in both the movies have a real time frame on them.
Yeah.
And it's sort of preordained there's a time frame. It's not like a summer fling when they're both on holiday. It's more along the lines of like, here's a setup, you're here, I'm employing you to paint my daughter before she goes and gets married. I'm here to let my wife recuperate while I gallivant around the world learning shit about shiny rocks.
Yeah.
And because she's got melancholy, oh God.
She was depressed, essentially.
And these two women, in both cases, having a relationship together, knowing there's a time frame where they won't be able to see each other ever again.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of beautiful and sad. And I think the that sort of ideal is what makes the relationships more interesting. Because there is no happy ending for them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in both now, like in both films, I'm skipping to the end now. We can go back and start from the beginning in a while. It doesn't matter. But towards the endings of both films, you get one person who wants to hold on to it, one person who wants to move on in both films.
Yeah.
So in Portrait of a Lady on Fire, you get Marianne essentially telling Eloise that she would rather that she reject the marriage, reject everything, and stay in the relationship with her. Yeah. And Eloise being like, you don't understand my situation and the fact that I do not have a choice in this. I have to marry this person.
Yeah.
And in Ammonite, you get Charlotte invites Mary to...
Yeah, that whole sequence is a bit screwy.
Yeah, it's really weird. So she invites Mary for a visit, but when Mary gets there, it turns out Charlotte has set up a whole bedroom next to her bedroom for Mary to move into. And Mary's like, I wish you'd told me this because I wouldn't have, I could have saved the boat fare. I wouldn't have come here. And, and Charlotte just doesn't get it. But Mary's like, what about my work? And she's like, oh, I hate to think of you out there on your own, digging out those rocks and things. She's like, you just don't get me because that is me.
It's Charlotte goes from someone stuck in a gilded cage to trying to stick Mary in a gilded cage. And she's like, no, I'm actually free out there. Like, no one can tell me what to do.
Yeah.
It's an interesting... Like, obviously the intentions from Charlotte's point of view were good, but, she's kind of just missed the...
Yeah. Yeah, in both cases, the intentions are good, but they are not quite understanding the situation and the life of the other person. And that, becomes an issue. So let's start from the beginning. we've talked, we've given a general overview of these films. I just want to talk about the premise of them because we haven't really gone into how they get to these setups. So, like, the beginning of Portrait of a Lady on Fire is, Marianne is arriving by boat and she's just kind of ditched on the beach and told to, climb up and whatever. And
after she jumped out of the boat.
That was to save the canvas.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And then you get this premise that she's been hired to paint a portrait of this woman to send to a suitor that they want to match her with to be married. But she basically builds a kind of an amicable relationship with the maid, even though she's... Marianne is interesting because, like Mary, she doesn't follow the conventions. So in her status, she shouldn't be making friends with the maid, but she also shouldn't be talking so casually with the woman of the house. She should be looking up to her, but looking down on the maid. But she is quite casual to the same extent with both of them. And she uses that friendship that she builds with the maid to be like, look, you need to tell me what's happened, because she finds out that the sister or the girl that she's going to paint has just been taken from a convent. Essentially, she's been living in a convent and she's been removed from that to set up this marriage. And the reason that that's happened is because her sister was supposed to be the one getting married, and then her sister died. And when she talks to the maid, she's like, you need to tell me what happened to your mistress. And she says, well, we were walking together by the cliffs, and then when I turned around, she was gone, and she was at the bottom of the cliff. And she's, and she basically says, I don't think she fell. I think she threw herself over it. And when she asks why, she says she didn't cry out. So the idea is that, you have this one, and it's like you were saying about the gilded cage in Ammonite. You have this person that we never get to meet in the film, but whose presence is hanging over the whole film to some extent, who, has been brought up and raised to marry this person and take her family to this other city, because they're going to Milan in Italy. And she so much didn't fit into this cage that she potentially and most likely took her own life. And now we're seeing her sister pulled from the life that she had, that she liked, that she was happy and content with, and put into her sister's shoes, knowing what happened to her sister. So it makes for a very interesting premise for the beginning of the film. And then in Ammonite, it's like we've already kind of discussed this a bit, but it's essentially Mary is living, doing this work by the sea, and this guy shows up wanting to learn from her, and he's an arrogant, pompous shithead. But he has his wife with him, and then him and his wife are supposed to go to continental Europe and go around the continent learning about geology. But he decides his wife is too sick, and he asks Mary to let her go on walks with her as a companion, so he knows that someone is looking after her and she's getting the sea air and things like that. And that's how they end up connected. You just haven't said anything in a while.
Yeah, it's because I literally was just going to let you go, because the point being is that regardless of the premises of the movies, I think just what I took away from both of them is just how well they're made.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
The shots were shot. There's nothing in there that's frivolous. Everything had a point and whoever edited this down did a really good job. I could look that up, but I'm not going to. It's for me. It's all the things that aren't said on screen, but shown, and it's show don't tell.
Yeah.
And I think that's missing quite a lot from. It's missing a lot from modern. Everything modern seems to be very.
Well, these are modern. These are from.
Yeah, but
2019 and 2020.
Sorry, indie then.
I mean, I think I thought Portrait of a Lady on Fire is indie.
No, I'm saying no. You're missing what I'm saying. The problem with big budget is everything is overproduced and crappy, because they tell, they don't show. There's nothing. You watch any movie made by Michael Bay and it's all like everything has to be explained constantly because the viewer is a dumbass. Versus this, where it was just the one of my favourite scenes is in A Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and she's not allowed to tell her that she's there to paint the painting of her.
Yes.
So they're just she's just subtly trying to catch looks of her to try and understand what she looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And her reaction to knowing, she's got that feeling in the back of her neck where she knows someone's looking at her, and then they just quickly see each other. And it's the same when you see it's somebody in the street or a stranger or something, and you're like, what's that person doing? And then they look at you and you look at them and you're like, ah, and then you look away.
And that plays a part later on, because when she finds out that she's a painter, she gets upset, and she gets, she's upset that
their entire friendship their paid friendship is on false pretenses.
Yeah, but it's not only that, it's that because one of the things she says to her is, so that's why you were looking at me.
Yeah.
Because obviously in her mind, she has seen this woman sneaking glances at her, and that has been part of what has developed this romantic interest in her, is she thinks that it's returned. I mean, it turns out it is returned.
But it's not until she shows her the painting and she's like, you didn't capture me at all, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You're supposed to be this, and then she goes, well, fine, I'll destroy it and paint a new one, but you have to, it's like the only way you're going to do with it. And it's like she sends a letter and says no, she's going to actually pose for it. Like everything's all smoothed over, and then they sort of get this weird, I wouldn't say extension, but that's where they can develop these feelings.
Yeah, because they get so essentially the painting is finished, and she's supposed to bring the painting, the mother's supposed to bring the painting to Milan with her and give it to the guy. But then she destroys the painting, and the mother gets real irate about it. And then Heloise says, I'll pose for her.
Yeah.
So then she's like, okay, fine. I'm going to Milan for 5 days. I'll be back in 5 days. It will be complete by then. And so they have 5 days where it's just the two of them and the maid in the house. And they're, she's intentionally posing, and they no longer have this lie over the relationship. And it's, they can be more open with each other. And that leads to romancy stuff.
Way to explain exactly what I just said.
No, but I'm saying, that's how that happens.
Yeah, that's literally what I just said.
I don't think you did that. Yeah, I think importantly about both films is that they're both written and directed by queer writer-directors. So Ammonite is written and directed by a gay man, and Portrait of a Lady on Fire is written and directed by a lesbian. And I know at least one of the actors is queer because the actress who plays Eloise is the ex-girlfriend of the director.
Yeah.
So there's people involved, especially in the writing and the directing of it, who know, what it's like to be in a queer relationship and to,
in the 1800s.
No, well, they don't quite know what. Well, I mean, they'll know from history, but they don't, but they know, they have an idea of what it's like to be in a relationship that other people might look down on or not view as equal to a heterosexual relationship, which is, I mean, obviously, things are a lot better now than they would have.
Some places.
In some places.
Some places, there's some subjects in one of these movies that would really upset some friggin' rednecks.
But not even only that. I mean, there's places at the moment where it's not only can you get the death penalty for being gay, but also it's legal for other people to murder you if they think you're gay.
Yeah.
Which is horrifying.
Yeah.
So, the world still has a long way to go. But, it's... I don't know, I was going to say it's probably improved, but it probably hasn't improved from then because...
No, because some places are literally getting worse.
Yeah. I think definitely a lot of, it's... In a lot of places, it's a lot more acceptable to be outspoken about it.
Yeah. Maybe. Look, I think the 24-hour news cycle really doesn't help things anymore. And I think, the availability of news is really, really affecting how heavy-hitting things are. But, I don't know, just what's going on in the States at the moment is just, really shit.
Yeah.
And...
We could literally publish this episode at any time. And
I know. What I'm saying is that, when it comes to, the same-sex relationships and the mention of abortion, as you said earlier, which we'd also already covered in a previous episode, but when the fuck did old white men be the best people to pick what happens to women?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. That's always been the way.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be.
Yeah, you look at these politicians who are the ones making decisions and you know for a fact that they've never, ever satisfied anybody physically. And they're the ones making decisions on who's allowed to love each other, who's allowed to get married, who's allowed to make mistakes and some of the shit that I've been reading, I know Twitter's a bad place to read any information, but some of the stuff that I've just seen posted on Twitter, it's just have you read a book? Do you, talking about, the hell was it? Women can't get pregnant unwillingly?
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I don't understand where that shit comes from.
It comes from the same, I said this to a workmate the other day. I like dumb conspiracies that don't hurt people.
Yeah.
I like the fact out there that are people that don't understand simple science and think the planet is flat or the moon's not real. What I don't like is people who think vaccines are the way the government's going to put tracking chips in you. Motherfucker, do you have an iPhone? Google knows where you are. Mm-hmm. Apple knows where you are. Yeah. Every time you post on Twitter, guess what? They know where you are. You take a photo on a phone. This is a crazy thing. I don't like taking photos. I don't like posting photos that I haven't personally edited from my Apple phone, because without stripping the metadata off them, it has a GPS location of where I took the photo. Mm-hmm. And you worried about the government putting chips in you, yet you'll clearly have an Instagram account and you'll post stuff from your iPhone's 11, and you're worried about the government knowing where you, that's fine. Encouraging people not to get vaccines on bullshit science, bad for everybody else. It's about social responsibility. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about taking women's rights to have an abortion away from them, and then I think it was Florida, where you have to go to court and the court has to rule that you're too immature to have an abortion, but you're mature enough to have a child? Like, what? Like, are they worried about their tax revenue in 15 years' time being too low? Like, I know New Zealand can't afford my generation of people to retire, and that's why they introduced KiwiSaver.
Mm-hmm.
Because, there's people out there, like people we know, who are both working and also receiving, I can't remember what it's called, the pension.
Right. Yeah.
So that's out of mine and yours and whoever else is in New Zealand, or who's a New Zealand tax resident paying taxes. That goes small, tiny percentage, like less than 15% of one tax period of 1 year is going to the pension fund. And it's bugger all money. It's the same as being unemployed or being on this sickness benefit or, whatever. But it's just like, that's fine. You can believe these things as long as it doesn't affect everybody else.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
And that's the thing, is that it's people who believe ridiculous things or, have no concept of reality are the ones making the laws, and that's not acceptable.
Or they just don't understand.
Yeah.
It was like the one for me is like, I don't like this person in particular, but when a certain person was in front of the Supreme Court explaining how his product, which most people have, including myself, explaining how his product made money, and he had to explain to the very white panel of very old white men of how his platform made money, and his response is, well, if you're not selling our data, how do you make money? And it's like, well, I sell ads.
Yeah.
You're forced to constantly watch ads. That's how I make millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I thought it was because you're stealing our data. It's like, no, you gave it to us voluntarily. I don't have to steal anything.
Yeah.
In what movie is it? The movie. I was going to say Friends with Benefits, but that's not the movie.
The movie about the platform you're talking about?
Yes.
The social network?
Social network. The guy invented it so he could steal women's information. I'm not mentioning his name because he doesn't deserve it.
Well, everyone knows who he is now.
Yes. Jessie Eisenberg.
Jessie Eisenberg is stealing your data.
Yeah. But it's just like, and it's such a, like I said to you the other day, I've said this multiple times recently. When the generation, and this is coming from someone who's in their mid-30s, when the generation who's currently in control are all dead, and we have the generation who lives through a life-changing, world-changing apocalypse every friggin' 5 years, I think it's going to be a hell of a lot better off. I don't think there's going to be people in my generation, and hopefully in the generation after mine, who will be accepting of, massive multinational corporations destroying the planet for their own profit. And it's like, well... The
problem is that there are, though. There, especially in America, you see it quite outspoken. There are people in our generation who would quite happily stick with all these shitty laws.
There's a joke that I heard recently from a podcast I listen to while I'm working. And they were talking about, in Florida, there's no fluoride in the water.
Right.
So the joke was, is that what people are like normally? And because there's, the conspiracy that putting fluoride in the water is about mind control.
Of course it is.
Yeah. It's got nothing to do with teeth. And it's like, is Florida just because they have no fluoride in the water? Is that what people are normally like?
That's baseline
humans.
That's
baseline humans. It's just Florida, man. And it's not without the mind control drugs that the government spends billions of dollars, putting into the water supply that actually calm people down, or otherwise they'll be riding alligators into Walmart on rascals and stabbing each other. But the reality is, the only reason that people mention Florida all the time is because their crime database is free to look up. So you can just look up crimes that have been committed in Florida, and because you get an area of a country and filled with people, elderly people in low decile and poor education, and it's hot, and if it's not hot, it's wet, and then because it's wet, it becomes
it's hot and wet at the same time.
Yeah.
Quite often.
Yeah. You know, just
it's like 100 degrees and also raining and thunderstorms.
It's interesting because we're on the subject of America, and you look at, what did I say? I can't remember. I mentioned it to somebody ages back, and it was a comedian saying it, but I believe it's a very true statement. People have to have a little bit of suck in their life, or they just become assholes.
Yeah.
And it's like, you look at California, an area where people don't, it's no bad weather. There's no bad weather in California. It's always bright and sunny and warm.
Like forest fires and things. And
that's not weather related.
Drought is weather.
Yeah, but they just steal other states' water.
Oh my god.
And they're just assholes to each other, and they're assholes to the...
You're alienating all our listeners in California and in Florida.
I'm generalizing here.
Anyway.
But, you know, and then you take people that, like, are in other... Oh, we'll say it from New Zealand standards. You go out into the country, or what we did recently when we were out in the middle of nowhere, and you say hi to people, and people say hi back to you.
Yeah. Well, it's the same in Ireland.
Yeah.
You know, you walk around Dublin and everyone ignores everyone and hopes that no one looks at them.
Yeah.
And then you walk around, you know, middle of the countryside and everyone's your friend and they wave at you and they say hi and, you know, cars drive by and wave at you. Yeah.
It's because it's just that difference in lifestyle brings a difference in attitude. And it's people who don't have to want for anything, don't understand the plights of people that have to want for things. And then they make decisions over those people, and it pisses me off because it's not their right. Right.
So to tie this back into the movies, this is the man. This is the patriarchy in these films.
100%.
Yeah, it's interesting because in Portrait of a Lady on Fire, there basically are no men. There's men at the beginning in the boat.
No, because they're like it's for me they were like it's a very looming threat.
Yes, yeah. So the men and the patriarchy are like a, you know, it's just this ominous thing that's hanging over their heads the whole time. But the only men you see on screen are at the beginning bringing Marianne there by boat, and then there's a guy arrives with Eloise's mother when she comes back from Milan, and he's taking the portrait. And then at the end of the film, there's, you know, crowds of people and stuff. Yeah. But very much there's no men for most of the movie, and it's them getting to be free and by themselves without the threat of men around them. And even the fact, you know, there's like multiple scenes revolving around this unwanted pregnancy and the abortion.
Yeah.
And the father is never mentioned.
Yeah.
There's no mention of a man at any point. But the whole time there's this looming knowledge that Heloise is promised to this man. If he likes her portrait, she will go and marry him.
Which is, I guess, you know, it's the equivalent of sending people asking each other for their Snapchats. Or following somebody on Instagram, I guess.
But like her mother talks about it, because her mother says...
Oh, her mother's a shit. She's literally selling her daughter off because she needs to go live with them because...
Yeah, she wants to go to Milan. But she says... What she says to Marianne is she's just like, I understand her anger. I know that anger. And she says, when I first arrived in this house, my portrait was already up on the wall. Yeah. I arrived in and I was looking at myself. Yeah. I was taken away from the city I love to this... Like, they're in a house on the coast with nowhere. Like, they're in the middle of nowhere. Totally isolated. And she's from this city that's booming with life and with music and art. And that's what she knows and loves. But she's had to spend her whole life in this place that she hates.
Yeah.
And she understands that she's uprooting her daughter and putting her daughter in a situation she doesn't want to be in. But she also is like, you know, there is life there. There's music there. There's, you know, she will learn to be happy there. But also, this is what they have to do as a wealthy family. You know, it is what is expected of them. That's what they, you know, you know, that's what Heloise even says to Marianne. It's like, you know, I don't have a choice in this. This is what needs to happen for my family, essentially. But yeah, so the patriarchy is very much a presence without there being any men in the film, which is very interesting because we do get to see, what they are like without the presence of men, but also we know that is, what's always on their mind.
Yeah.
And in Ammonite, it's quite similar because, their first interactions are with her husband around and they don't interact, essentially, because her husband's around.
I think it's a greater threat than that because it's literally talking about the fact that, from Mary's point of view, regardless of what she achieves, it'll be, taken away from her.
Yeah, yeah. And you get that in Portrait of a Lady on Fire as well because... Marianne.
The paintings at the end of it.
Yeah, so at one point she talks about how she's not allowed, she doesn't paint men because she's not allowed to, because she's a woman and there are rules. And she's planning to take over her father's business as a painter because her father is a painter. And at the end of the film, we see she's painted, because they made a lot of parallels to themselves and the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Yeah. And this idea that, if you turn around, she'll be gone. So she's painted this painting of Orpheus and Eurydice saying goodbye to each other, saying a farewell as she's pulled back into the other world.
Yeah.
And she's standing there and a man comes up and is like, oh, are you...
Your father's work's really good. And she's like, actually, it's not mine. It's mine.
Yeah.
It's mine and I put his name on it. Fuck you.
Yeah, she's like, I had to put his name on it to get it in the gallery.
Yeah.
And he's just like, oh, okay. But for her to succeed in the art world, she has to do it under her father's name. She can't let people know that it's her that's painted it because it's not allowed for her to do that. And you get that in Ammonite because you get, she's discovering all these things and sending them off to the museum, and she's got artifacts in the British Museum and they've just taken her name off it. Like, you see that it's the very opening scene.
Yeah.
And I love that it's the opening scene because the opening scene is a woman on the floor washing the ground of the museum, and the men all push past her and put this down, and they see a woman's name on the tag, take it off and just say Ichthyosaurus, British Museum or whatever. And then you see that paralleled when she visits Charlotte's house, because her husband has put up all his artifacts that he's found around Europe with his name on them, including the one that she found.
Yeah.
He's put his name on it, and Charlotte has stuck Mary's name over it.
Yeah.
And it's the first time, obviously, Mary's actually been credited with her own work. So I think nowadays everything that she had done, or most things she had done, is credited under her own name.
Yeah, it's just shitty that it took, but that was the time.
Yeah. So there's definitely patriarchy looming in both of these films.
Yeah.
You very much get a sense, even though that for a lot of both films there is no interaction with men, you get a very strong sense in both films that so much of these women's lives is impacted by the fact that they have to follow the rules of men.
Yeah. Before moving into some trivia, some budgets, and some box office, what is the second incident with the egg?
Oh, I don't know. So that was one of the IMDb trivia, was about...
Because her mum, she takes eggs from their chickens, and the mum cooks them, and then she cracks her open, and it's like a half-developed fetus. It's got feathers and stuff. And the trivia is this is there are 2 occasions with eggs in it.
No, it's not. It's the second time a character played by Gemma Jones has had an egg-related misfortune.
Oh, right.
So she obviously... Oh, it looks like it's in Bridget Jones's diary. She has something to do with an egg in that. So it's just that... I don't know what... It's just so weird to me that was a piece of trivia, on IMDb trivia, was that Gemma Jones... This is the second time Gemma Jones's character, a character played by Gemma Jones... has a egg-related misfortune.
Excellent.
Yeah, so she has her egg misfortunes. So you want to go on to... What do you want to do, budgets and box offices?
Nah, trivia first, please.
Trivia first, please. So Mary Anning's family, obviously not direct descendants, but distant relations, were delighted that a film was being made about her, but they were very confused about the fact that it was a lesbian film. It seems to have been quite divisive. Some of them were like, there's no evidence to support this, why would you do this? And then others were like, well, as long as it's in line with the spirit of Mary, that's fine. So the director and the writer said, well, very little is known about her life, so there's no proof of a heterosexual relationship either, so why not follow this line, The other thing, I only actually took down 2 notes from from Ammonite. The other thing was that the sex scene that we see in Ammonite was entirely choreographed by Kate Winslet, because Francis Lee, the director, didn't feel comfortable, telling them how, I suppose especially as a gay man, how a lesbian sex scene should go. So Kate Winslet choreographed it, and she also asked for only women in the room, because I think it might be Saoirse Ronan's first sex scene on screen, or else she hasn't done very many. I don't know. So she just wanted to make sure that Saoirse Ronan felt very safe and comfortable. So they, and they marked out beats in the scene so that they would have it, very narrative driven and things like that. So she said that it's the proudest she's ever felt doing a love scene, and by far the least self-conscious. That's Kate Winslet. There's also a moment in it where she's fully naked. You see like all of Kate Winslet at one point in that film. And she said that she really wanted that to be in the film, because that is something that is generally missing from middle-aged women in love scenes in films, that they tend to try and cover up, be like, oh, she's middle-aged, no one wants to see that. And she was like, no, this is a part of what the relationship would be, so why, and there's no shame in showing my body, so why not do it? So I quite respect her for that, but I like that the director kind of went, hey, I
don't understand the mechanics of the situation.
Yeah, can someone take over the this particular scene? So in Portrait of a Lady on Fire, what did I have for this one? Apparently I didn't even, I took this down before we watched it, and then I still didn't even notice it because I'm so focused on subtitles things. So obviously we watched this in French with subtitles. But one of the things about the French language is that there are formal and informal versions of the word you, like there's vous and tu. And apparently for the whole movie, Eloise and Marianne use vous, the formal version, and then it's just in the very last sequence when Eloise tells her to turn around, and she turns around and sees her in her wedding dress, and it's that, parallel again to Orpheus and Eurydice. That's the only time she uses the informal you, is to get her to turn around at the end. The painter who painted on it, so she did all the sketches and all the paintings of the film. Every time you see the hand painting, it's her. But she painted for 16 hours every day during the course of filming.
Christ.
That's a lot of painting.
I don't even think I'm awake for 16 hours a day.
Yeah. The chanting, so one of the things, I don't think I took it down.
Yeah, the music and
There's no score in the whole of Portrait of a Lady on Fire.
Yeah.
There's no background music at any point. They wanted the rhythm to come from other things in the scene, from what's happening, from the movement, from the sounds of the sea and things like that. So there's the choreography comes from the sequence shots and stuff. There's no score. But the music is all diegetic if there is music. There's a bit where she plays a harpsichord, and there's a bit at the end with an orchestra playing the same music, Vivaldi. But there's also the women around the bonfire chanting in Latin.
Yeah.
And what they're chanting is Fugere non possum, which means I cannot escape. And that's what they're chanting over and over again, and then that's what's played in the end credits of the film.
Yeah.
So I think very, very fitting for the situation that the film is about, that this is, they are bound to these lives, especially Heloise is very much bound to the life that has been planned for her.
Yeah.
She cannot escape. So this note I just found very interesting. So Céline Sciamma said that one of the manifestos of the film was to get rid of the idea of a muse. She says that the muse the muse is an idea that was developed to minimize or hide the participation of women in the art industry. And she says muses are typically seen as silent, fetishized women who are inspiring just because they're beautiful. And it totally erases, the amount that they put into it. Because, it's, for a long time, women's opportunities in art were limited to being a model. They couldn't do art themselves. And she is saying, models are co-creating the art because they are, one of the brains in the room. They're helping to guide the artist. It's not just, like, oh, I saw her and she's beautiful, so she's my muse. It's a collaborative thing. So she wanted us to feel like it is collaborative, and I think that's part of why, you get that first portrait where there is no collaboration and it's dead. It looks lifeless. Whereas then when they collaborate to make the art together, it not only looks like Eloise, but it looks alive. It looks, real.
Yeah.
So she really wanted to bring in this idea that, the model has as much, or, has quite a bit of the artistry, or, quite a bit of influence on the art. And it's not just that they look pretty. They collaborate with the artist to a degree. So I thought that was interesting. So it's very much a film about, women's achievements being minimized in several senses of the word. So budget and box office. So there's no real available budget for Ammonite. All they've said is that it was less than £10 million, which could mean anything. So that's about 13 million US dollars.
Pretty
so
heavy.
Less than that is what they've said, but they haven't said exactly how much less than that. Budget for Portrait of a Lady on Fire was $5.4 million.
Yeah.
So we could estimate probably they're about the same, less than 10 million, and 5.4 million is less than 10 million. In the box office, international box office, Ammonite made 1.13 million.
Eee.
And Portrait of a Lady on Fire, as an independent French film, made 12 million. You would think the movie with Kate Winslet and Saoirse Ronan would have done better than the,
yeah, but it's the same as when we watched sometimes. I can't remember.
Never Rarely, Sometimes Always.
Yeah, and what was the other one? What was the other one called?
Unpregnant.
Unpregnant. It was just one group of people bringing the scores down.
Yeah, well, that's box office.
Yeah.
But I had heard of Portrait of a Lady on Fire,
but people read people's stupid ideas. I never read reviews.
True.
If I want to, I've watched enough movies, and I hope listeners at home have watched enough movies to make their own decisions.
Yep.
Like, reality is box office matters to the people who produced it and nobody else.
Yeah.
You're not going to watch a movie
based on the box office.
You're not going to watch an art house movie hoping it gets a sequel. Like,
yeah.
it's you end up with craziness. Like, I think we've mentioned it multiple times, or it could have been another group, but I definitely talked to you about it. The planned sequels to Gladiator.
Right.
Written by Nick Cave and friggin' having him Maximus resurrected and fighting Nazis with Jesus, and you don't box office only matters to producers.
I don't want to see a sequel to either of these films, but I probably will watch both films again. In terms of rating, Portrait of a Lady on Fire has 8.1 on IMDb, and Ammonite has 6.5, which is lower than it should be, I think. Probably for both of them. Portrait of a Lady on Fire has pretty good percentages on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got 98% from critics and 92% from audiences, so that's not bad. Whereas Ammonite has got 69% from critics and 85% from audiences.
69.
I think they're both pretty good movies. I would be quite happy recommending both of these films to people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have anything else to say?
Not a whole lot. Do you?
No.
Okay. Well, this is our first LGBT specific episode.
Yeah.
I featuring not only 2 films about queer relationships, but also by queer writer-directors. So I thought that was good. And we do have another episode coming out in June that will also be LGBT specific, so people can look forward to that.
And this was definitely ladies first.
Yes, true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought this was a really nice duo of films to start off our LGBT films with.
Yep.
But if people have recommendations for other ones, we're going to try and do it every year, do 2 LGBT films, or two sets of 2 LGBT films in June every year. So I'm hoping we don't run out. So if people have suggestions for queer films that are similar to each other, let us know. Or if people have suggestions for films in general that we should cover, absolutely, we will take those suggestions.
And add them to the list.
Yeah, we'll add them to the list. Actually, the ones we're doing next were suggested by a listener.
Oh, okay.
That listener is my mom, but that doesn't matter. She's our number 1 fan. Anyway, yeah, so thank you all for listening. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at ittakes2_pod or Facebook at ittakes2pod, and our website is ittakes2.co.nz.
And now more than ever, stay safe out there, folks, and we'll catch you next time.
Goodbye.